I think it's time to start, don't you think, Mark?
3 o'clock sharp, so
Check.
let's get started. Thank you very much, Arjan. Okay, hello and welcome everybody to the European session of the Global Swimway Webinar Marathon. Thank you for joining this session. Maybe if you joined some previous session, you're all welcome to join this one. My name is Mark van Heukelen. I am an aquatic ecologist working in the Netherlands on fish migration projects. And approximately 10 hours ago, we started this webinar journey with the webinar session of Oceania. And we made our way through Eastern Asia, Central and South Asia, and Western Asia, and Africa. And now we arrived in Europe. I'm very honored to be the moderator of this session. And we've got a great lineup of interesting and passionate experts that will present to you their stories on rivers and fish migration. And beside the speakers, we've got already almost 200 participants besides yourself that are joining, and this number is still rising. And that's making this session one of the busiest webinar sessions of the whole marathon. So no further pressure for the speakers, but I think it's going to be a great session. I hope we have a great session together and that you all will be inspired by the talks. Now, before we start, you are in view and listening modes. That means that you can only listen and view this webinar. You can, however, ask questions. This way you can join this webinar. And I want to ask you to please use the Q&A button that you can find below on your screen. Now, we really would like to have some informative questions for our speakers. But since there is limited time, they have about 10 minutes to present. I would like to ask you to already start asking these questions when they haven't finished yet, because our question manager, which is Rosa, she will ask then the question to the speaker. So then we have them in time. Now, if you have any other questions or comments, you can put it in the chat. And we have a chat manager as well, which is Ivan, and he will answer all your questions. Now, I would like to ask Arjan Berghuizen. He's the managing director from the World Fish Migration Foundation and the organization that organizes this webinar. And I want to ask him to start his presentation, give an introduction for this session.
All right. Thank you, Mark. But before I start, I would like to do a short poll, trying to find out who we have here in front of us, so to say. In fact, by the way, Mark, you said 10 hours. It's 12 hours already. We are halfway. So you know. I would like to do a short poll and to see a little bit about you. You can click on the answers and then submit. The first question is basically about, what is it specifically that you like? Is it fish or river, nature, or all of it? What is your background, professional background in this case? Are you a scientist or a policymaker, or are you in business? And then the final question is, do you plan to follow more sessions than only the one, this European one? Answers are coming in very, very quickly already. I see them rising up. More than 100. Half of the people already replied. I'm going to wait for a little bit more, giving everybody a chance to submit their answers. And now it's starting to stabilize. So I'm going to end this poll now and share the results with you. So who do we have in the audience at the moment? We have people who, most of them do like fish and rivers and nature together. So that's the majority. Actually, the majority is scientists, not the majority in total, but the one most represented, so to say. Also quite a few people from non-profit organizations. And most of the attendants are planning to watch other sessions as well. Okay, so that's nice. That's good to know. Thank you very much. Let me continue. Who are we? So we are World Fish Migration Foundation. This is a photo from our team some time ago in France, where we were at the Vezin Dam. This dam, meanwhile, is removed actually. It's quite exciting project, very, very large dam, very large reservoir that disappeared, and it's for the benefit of salmon. But what we see here is the team at that time, and we also see that there are many other peoples involved in the whole World Fish Migration Foundation as volunteer, or also working together with us as colleagues, and it's a growing team. And that growing team has this tendency to come up with crazy ideas, and then we are going to do it. This is one of them. First, I thought when I heard about it, oh, that's a nice idea. And Pao and other colleagues, we were all quite satisfied. Then the second emotional phase that we had was, oh, but this is more complex than we thought. Then we had a certain stage that we thought, oh, what did we do? This is really complex to organize. But now we're just happy we do this experiment. Maybe it's not all perfect, but bear with us. It's for the good benefit, so to say. The World Fish Migration Foundation started in 2014. First time when the World Fish Migration Day was actually organized. More than 270 events in more than 50 countries. Pretty amazing for a first event like that. Then after that, we had projects involving, for example, we launched the Happy Fish as a model for projects that are really good for migratory fish. And in 2016, we had a second World Fish Migration Day. And also in that time, we launched the European Dam Removal Project. I will tell a little bit more about that later on. We started the Amber project, especially for this European session. This is relevant. Fantastic project where we map all the different barriers, try to map all of them in European rivers. And that's pretty a big task, but also looking for innovative solutions and identifying what the impacts are. And we have case studies. Great project. Carlos is later on telling a little bit more about that as well. Then we had in 2018 World Fish Migration Day number 3 with more than 570 events in 60 countries. And at that time we also launched our second guide, From Sea to Source guide. If you want to know more about migratory fish and projects, read that book. You can still download it. And we are starting now the Global Swimways, where you are taking part of at this moment. And we hope in October 24 to organize the next World Fish Migration Day. I hope you will join. And in the end, we want to celebrate every day a river opening. By doing all these activities, the foundation has gathered more than 10,000 contacts all over the world, all people involved in fish, rivers, nature, and who are really eager to cooperate. And that's strong. That is nice. That's really strong. And that's also necessary because we are working, for example, on a new report of the Living Planet Index. That is a sort of index that measures how well it's going with certain species. This is an old one. The new version will show it's really going bad with migratory fish. Really big, very grim picture. There's a big task that we have to do if we want to protect these animals. And therefore, we thought it would be good to start learning from other initiatives like the flyways. The birds of the flyways concept that's being used by bird lovers is fantastic. We can make use of that. It started in the 1930s. And it was set up by scientists who have been mapping all the different migration routes of the birds. I'm sorry, I have to walk a little bit because I just realized that my battery is almost finished. So here's the plug-in. And that initiative was very fruitful because in the end, it led to the Ramsar Convention, which took place in 1971, where different wetlands along the flyways were actually protected. And now you have even summits of flyways where countries and government officials and all different NGOs sit together thinking how to improve protection of migratory birds. Now that's something that we want for migratory fish as well. Then we need to start mapping. That's what the people from the flyways have done very well. Scientists have really gathered all information necessary to map these flyways and see what's happening within these flyways and how you can improve protection in that. So we started with the first map of swimways in the world. This is this drawing where, yeah, it's basically interpretation of where we want to work towards. And now we want to go a step further to have a more scientific approach. Luckily, we were helped by the Cambridge Conservation Initiative, together with IUCN, UNEP, and the University of Cambridge, to start working on that. And now, meanwhile, a lot of other organizations like WWF, ZSL, University of Groningen, many organizations are starting to cooperate on this initiative, which is really hopeful. And here you can see a first glance of what we're working towards. The main global swimways worldwide. We identify that those are the routes which are used most by most migratory species, or the most threatened ones. And it's not ready at all, I have to admit, because there's so much still unknown. We need much more data sets. We need much more information that often is already there, but we need to make sure that that is going to be connected. So we see this as a joint effort. That's why we also think this webinar can be really helpful. Why are we doing this? Well, I'd like to use the example of the European eel. The European eel is a fish, as you mostly probably like if you know if you're in the European session. It's born in the Sargasso Sea, floats slowly with the current to Europe, and then goes into rivers and into the countries, grows, and when it's big, it's going back again. Enormous travel, enormous migration, but along that migration, along those swimways, there are a lot of risks. When they get close to the coast of Europe, they risk to be fished in fishing nets and disappear in stomachs of people. Or when they finally grow up and want to go back, they risk to be chopped in pieces by pumping stations in the Netherlands if they are unlucky. And these risks have led to a sort of a joint approach. And that is really the good news about it. That in Europe, there's now actually a joint effort, even a legal effort, to protect European eel. That is the way forward. That's what we want to promote. And this cooperation, here's a photo that is taken 10 years ago. It was for me personally an enormous highlight, where a group of people who have different backgrounds, who all like nature, fish and rivers, cooperated, because at that time we heard the good news that the fish migration river, the project that we were working on, was continuing. And that was about this situation. This is a huge dam in the Netherlands dividing the sea and freshwater, a big problem for migratory fish. And as a group of enthusiasts, we said, let's make a gap, a hole in this dam. Now, that is not really easy in the Netherlands, so it took us a lot of talking and innovative thinking. But in the end, we succeeded. And currently, this 50 million euro project is actually being built. Now, that is something which makes us all so proud that if you do this together, if you together work on a project and do it smartly, you can really do things which seem impossible at first. Now, another quite large task that we see for ourselves, or a target, is that we really want to scale up the dam removal movement in Europe. Dam removals, which are already happening in the USA, as inspiration for us as well. We saw this morning also in Korea, many places, is enormous potential to start improving the situation for migratory fish. And together with different organizations, each taking advantage from the strengths, we wanted to make a change, actually. And that's going pretty well. What I liked about this morning is that, for example, we had a similar stories in South Korea. We had stories from from Bhutan about the Masir, about how to involve people, fly fishers, fishing people to protect the Masir there. We had great examples of how in Australia people are dealing with droughts. We had a fantastic story by an original tribe from New Zealand, how the local culture is actually helping to support conservation of eels there. We had Derek from India explaining that he as an angler really wants to make a change and educate people. Lee Baumgartner from Australia was telling about integrated solutions. We had such a, I thought, pretty funny and example of South Africa, where wine bottles played a very important role connecting landowners to protecting migratory fish projects there. So many examples, and that is why we do this webinar. We want to exchange the good, the best practices, and together make a change and make the world a better place for migratory fish and the people in the end as well, of course. So thank you. Mark.
Thanks a lot, Arjan, for this presentation, this impressive introduction, and really nice that you could show us something about what has been taking place for the last 12 hours already, different presentations. I also really love the approach of the swimway approach, where you really see that this topic is going beyond our national borders, and it emphasizes the need and the power of cross-boundary collaborations. So thanks a lot, Arjan. And that brings us to the next speaker, William Darwell. William, could you please start your video? He will talk about these swimways, mapping these swimways. And William is the head of the Freshwater Biodiversity Unit at the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN. He's on the Global Species Program based in Cambridge. So Will, if you're ready for it, then, well, please, the floor is yours. Maybe you're still on mute.
I think he's still, there. Yes, you're still muted, Will. Unmute.
Hello.
Perfect, thank you.
Yes, sorry, I lost the mute button all of a sudden. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it perfectly. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. And hello from the southwest of England. I'm absolutely delighted to join this event, which is amazing, I have to say, so far. If you ever think you're working alone in the freshwater world, well, this just proves that not to be the case. And no, it really is excellent. But in the southwest of England, we also have some lovely rivers, as you'll see in the background to this, my title slide here. This is the River Tavy in Devon, and we have migratory fish here as well. And I grew up next to this river, and unfortunately over the last sort of 30, 40 years, the decline in the species migrating, like the Atlantic salmon and sea trout and eels, is very significant. So a webinar like this is a fantastic way to really raise the awareness and profile that, you know, something's not right with our migratory fishes. The subject of my talk really is to introduce or say a bit more about the Global Swimways project itself, which Arjan has introduced briefly. Then I'll talk a bit more about the red list of threatened species, which is potentially a very valuable tool in determining what migration route qualifies as a global swimway. Then I'll see a quick look at how well we're doing and assembling all the data that we need to identify these swimways. And I'll end up with some quick thoughts on the next steps. So the Global Swimways project is a relatively small project aimed at kicking off the whole Global Swimway Initiative, and it's funded by the Cambridge Conservation Initiative in the UK, and a partnership between the World Fish Migration Foundation, IUCN, UNEP WCMC, and the University of Cambridge. And we've got a number of specific objectives. The first one is to work out how we might classify and map what a global swimways would look like. And I should emphasize that this is preliminary work. So we just want to see, get an idea of how things might look, and then it would go out to a much wider consultation. We also are going to develop a tool for decision makers so they can know when there's sort of screening development projects, they'll be able to identify if migratory fish are in the area. This information will be presented in a tool, a very excellent tool called IBAT, Integrated Biodiversity Assessment Tool, and there's the link, which brings together the World Protected Areas database, key biodiversity areas, and the red list all in one site. Then we are also working on the advocacy. We all know that there's not enough profile and not enough interest in our migratory fishes, and we've already been represented at the Convention on Migratory Species meeting in India, and the swimways concept was very well received there, which is great, but more work needs to be done. And finally, just to raise awareness of the vulnerability of these species to things such as infrastructure and dams, and do a bit more research on that front. And here's a link at the bottom to the Global Swimways project, if you want to learn more about it. So I don't have to say much more about this because Ariane has done a very good job there, but just to say that we are not starting from scratch. We're learning from the Flyways initiative developed for the birds, and because it's been so successful in bringing countries together to manage their shared species, which is, you know, they feel the birds that migrate up and down through countries are shared. And our Swimways project, we aim to learn from that experience and to build something similar for freshwater fish. So how do we define a swimway? A big question. There are many, many rivers full of migratory fish, but obviously if we identify them all as globally important, that's not going to help so much. So we're investigating a number of possible criteria we might use to determine what qualifies as a swimway. For example, the obvious one, the numbers of migratory fishes using the river system. Maybe the lengths of migration routes could be a factor. Maybe numbers of endemic migratory fishes endemic to that system. Then numbers of threatened migratory fishes. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. It relates to the red list. And possibly socioeconomic value of the associated fishery. And there will be other criteria. The idea is to test these out, see how they look, and then put it out for a wider consultation. So the IUCN Red List of threatened species, this is the world's most comprehensive information source for looking at assessing the extinction risk of species at the global level. When you assess a species, you assign a category of extinction risk. Most of you, I think, know about this because they've been mentioned a lot in previous talks. But for example, a species might be critically endangered, vulnerable, least concern. And a proportion of them, a subset, are considered threatened. These are the critically endangered species, the endangered and vulnerable. As part of the process for assessing a species, we build distribution maps for each species, which is clearly going to be very useful in mapping our global swimways. We also tag species as to whether they are migratory or not. So we get a lot of information from the red list. And finally, you might ask, well, where does all this information come from? Well, we have an amazing network through the Species Survival Commission. We have specialist groups looking at particular taxa, and we have a number focused on freshwater fishes. And I'm sure many of you on this marathon webinar are members of those groups. But if you want to know more about them, you can see the URL has come up there. So progress, looking at the global scale for assessing all the world's freshwater fish. Well, this is obviously a mammoth task, and I've actually personally been involved in this, working on it for almost 20 years. But we're almost there. I'd say 2 years from now, and it should be complete. The areas in red are fully assessed. All known species have been mapped. Dark blue are underway right now, so should be finished in the next year or so. And the light blue are areas where we're planning the work. So the total number, and it rises every time we look due to you taxonomists, is currently around 17,800 species. Almost 10,000 are already assessed fully, and a number more in the pipeline. Of these, 30% are assessed to be threatened, at risk of extinction. The total number of migratory fishes, at the moment, this sort of estimate I'm given is about 1,300 species. And we've assessed and mapped about 850 of those so far, of which 22% are threatened. 52 of these species are critically endangered. And this means that unless we do something to act, intervene in some way, they're in a very high risk of extinction in the not too distant future. So that's not very good. And in terms of what we know, so far, we have 112 data deficient migratory species, which means we don't know enough about them to determine if they're threatened or not. So moving to Europe, let's stress this is preliminary work. We have quite good information for Europe because all freshwater fish have been assessed and mapped for the IUCN Red List. But there's some new work, actually Jörg Freyhoff and Matt Ford are working on this right now to reassess them all. And I think they're doing it in more detail, particularly in the mapping. Should be available later in the year. So we would update this information. But straight off, by looking at the migratory fishes in Europe, you can start to pull out which river systems have the most number of migratory fish, which is a great tool straight off. So we had 83 species identified, coded as migratory in Europe. 20% of those are threatened. 9 are critically endangered. As you'd expect, these are mainly the sturgeons, the European eel, and Albonus fistonicus. And there's not too many, but 6 data deficient species where we still need to collect more information. So for Europe, the information is quite good. We can always do it more, but for a good start, it's a lot of it's there. Now, if we just to see the scale of what we're up against, you've all seen these maps, but this is just overlaying the dams that we have either in place or planned across Europe. It's not the only threat, but it clearly is a major one for migratory species. So highlighting the important river systems for migration routes, swimways is clearly important. Okay, so what are the next steps? Well, at the European level, obviously the first thing is to update our information with the latest Red List update, which will improve our data on the migration route mapping. To visualize the swimways using a number of the criteria I was talking about before. At the moment, we're really just been looking at numbers of species in a system, but we want to add in like threatened species, distance of migration, and so on. And we also looking at incorporating the marine sections of swimways, as for the example that Arian showed just now for the European eel. So moving on to the broader scale, as I said, the Global Swimways project is a small one at the moment, a kickoff project, really. We're hoping to develop this into a large global project. And we're aiming to provide a comprehensive map of all the world's global swimways, which would be a very powerful awareness raising outcome. We're also thinking about whether it'd be possible to get this an global swimway standard as an internationally accepted recognition of these migration routes. Building public awareness, this has been very good for the global flyways for birds. So through events like this one today, we need to build public awareness. Do more informing policy. For example, a conventional migratory species I mentioned has not that much focus on freshwater fish at the minute. So we need to do more work there. And finally, we need to generate support for the thousands of you working out there on migratory fish passage. I'm sure you all agree you could do with as much help and support as possible. Thank you very much for listening. I don't know how my time went, but I've rushed through it all. So I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. You did very well. There is even some time for a question, final question. So Rosa, can I ask you, are there any interesting questions Will can answer? Rosa, unmute yourself, please.
Sorry for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, William, for your presentation. So yes, we do have indeed several questions. The first one of them, what do you consider a migratory fish species? Only diadromic or also potamodromic species? Because this last category is too often neglected.
Yep, that is a good question. We have lots of different types of migratory species, and I think it depends when we start looking at trying out different criteria. At the moment, when we say migratory species, it includes the potamodromous species as well. But obviously, when we're looking at developing a map of global swimways, we don't want it to include everything. So we'll create some trial maps which include all the different migratory species, then apply some of the different criteria and have a look at the results, see if it pulls out different river systems to be highlighted, or if when we start highlighting every single river system, obviously we need to start moving thresholds, for example, the numbers of species in a system, make it a bit higher, or we might start removing some of those with shorter migration distances, like some of the potamodromous species. But it'll all go out for consultation. The idea is to just show what it might look like and get input from everybody.
Thank you for this answer, Will. Looking at the time, there are more questions, but maybe if you find the time or if you like, you can answer them in the Q&A topic, just by typing an answer. That will really help people. But for now, thank you very much for your presentation, Will. So we continue to our next speaker, which is Carlos Garcia de Linis, and he will take on the challenging topic of reconnecting Europe's rivers. Now, Carlos is a professor in aquatic biosciences at the Swansea University in Wales, and the director of the Center for Sustainable Aquatic Research at the Department of Biosciences. Also, he is Amber Project Coordinator. So, Carlos, if I can ask you to unmute your microphone and start sharing your screen. Yes, that is perfect. Okay, so if you're ready, then please take the floor.
So can you hear me, Mark?
Yes, I can hear you very well. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so thank you so much. And it's an honor to be here. I think it's an amazing event. So it's a pleasure to be here. Okay, so reconnecting Europe's rivers, where do we start? Well, we start with a problem. We start with this problem. The problem that it is possibly the most fragmented part of the world in terms of river fragmentation. More details will be given about this atlas of barriers in Europe on the 29th of June. But I think it's fair to say that there's probably about 1 million barriers in Europe. Okay, we have over 630,000 unique records in the databases that we have compiled, and we have also carried some extensive field validation that enables us to correct that information with data that has been ground truth in the field. So why is this a problem? Well, it is a problem. Most of you are familiar with fish, but I want to remind you that barriers and dams are more than just a problem with fish. As a matter of fact, I find it very interesting that in the latest Global Risk Report that was published early this year, the World Economic Forum has listed 4 major problems, all of which are related to water management issues. So it's not just the plain water crisis, but it's also biodiversity loss, it's climate action failures, and extreme weather. All of these are problems which are going to be related to the way we administer and we manage water. So fragmentation is a huge issue. So what do we do? 1 million barriers is impossible to mitigate against all of them. We need a plan, we need a strategic plan, and we need a roadmap. And what I'm going to do now is to share with you some of our current thinking and how we think that we can tackle this problem, not at the local scale, but at the global scale, because we can't mitigate against all these barriers. We need to prioritize, we need to put the resources where the gains are going to be highest. Okay, so I'm going to share with you 3 possible strategies. And as I said, this is very preliminary work, but this is some of the principles we are working on. The first one is to notice that not all barriers are equally abundant, of course, and critically, not all barriers have the same height. On the right-hand side, you can see the distribution of barriers across Europe, and that's about 600,000 barriers, for which we have height on not only in all of them, but in a fair number of them. And 85% of them are less than 2 meters. Okay, so if we plot the relationship between barrier height and abundance and frequency, we can see that most barriers are actually quite small. Okay, this is very, very important to remember. When we talk about barriers, we don't talk about large dams. In fact, we talk about very often smaller structures. But of course, if we plot, just a second, yes, here it is. If we plot the relationship between barrier height and per capita impact, I think that most of you would agree that the taller a barrier, the more damage is likely to cause. We know very well that this is true for migratory fish, but we also know the taller the structure, the more water is going to impound, and the more likely it is that it's going to disrupt the ecosystem as a whole. So as you can see, there is here a fundamental asymmetry between the abundance of very small barriers and the impact of very large ones. So if we put these 2 things together, we can see that the net impact is going to be highest, is going to reach probably a peak, a maximum for intermediate and small barriers, because that's where the 2 parameters are combined, is the abundance of very small barriers and the per capita impact of very large ones. Okay, so very small barriers, I'm talking about small weirs or culverts like this one that we can see here. By large barriers, of course, we're talking about the large dams that we're all familiar with. Okay, so why is this important? This is important because this brings us to 3 potential strategies for mitigation that we need to take into account. We could mitigate against the very large, a few very large barriers, those that cause the highest per capita impact, or on the other hand, we could mitigate against the most abundant barriers, those which are most commonly found in our rivers, or we could target those barriers where the net impacts are highest. Okay, and of course, this situation, this particular compromise is going to change from catchment to catchment, but I think it's important that we realize that this needs to be taken into account. Okay, the second potential strategy is to actually look at which barriers are in use, which barriers are actually being used by society and what sort of services they provide. This is data that has been collected by citizens working across Europe, and I have, with my colleagues, we have compiled this data recently, and we have just looked at records for which we have information on the use, the extent to which these barriers are being used or not, and those countries where we have more than 100 records. And one of the first things which I think is striking is that there are some countries, like for example, Poland, where our colleagues are telling us that up to an incredible 40% of the barriers do not appear to serve any useful purpose. That is not the case across Europe, but there are some countries, like for example in the Netherlands or in Ireland, where the opposite appears to be the case. But on average, it is about 15% across Europe of the barriers that our citizens, our volunteers, our friends have checked, they appear to be out of use. Of course, this is prone to fluctuations. It may be in error, but when we have compared by doing our own ground truthing in Great Britain and the United Kingdom, the data, the information on use that the citizens were giving us, which for the UK suggests that about 11% of the barriers were obsolete or out of use, our own estimates done by trained personnel gives us an estimate of about 12%. So as you can see, it's very, very close, which gives us some confidence on the accuracy of this data, which is very important. Now, remember I said that we estimate there may be a million barriers. Well, we only need to do the sums to realize that there may be 150,000 obsolete barriers out there. 150,000 is a lot. Now, we have developed an app, a smartphone app called the Barrier Tracker that anybody can download from the Amber website. And what is very important now is to continue this exercise with citizen scientists and go out there and find them. We need to know where these obsolete barriers, which we estimate may be in the order of 150,000 are, in order to record that they are not being used and in order to be used in mitigation plans. Okay, the potential gains, and this is some quick calculations we have done, but that I wanted to share with you, could be substantial. If we could only act, if we only acted on 2% of those obsolete barriers, okay, so there's no conflict, they are not being used by anyone, they are surplus to requirements, they have passed their working life. If we selected 2% of those obsolete barriers, we could mitigate the impacts of 3,000 obstacles. And by using a very conservative gain of 10 kilometers gain in accessibility per barrier that has been mitigated, we could be easily 30,000 kilometers of rivers. Okay, and that would improve connectivity, globally, massively. And finally, the third strategy that I wanted to share with you is some preliminary simulations that we are doing. In this case, it's a river in Wales called the River Avon, that we have mapped extensively every single barrier, artificial and natural. And what my colleagues and ourselves have done is to see what would happen if we were to remove 1% of the barriers, 2% of the barriers, 3% of the barriers, all the way to 100%. When would we start to see an improvement in connectivity? And this is what I can share with you here. So we start with 10% of the barriers removed, 20%, 30%, 40%, all the way to 100%. And as you can see, for the first part of the curve, nothing changes. So there are very modest gains by removing just a small percentage of barriers. This actual cutoff is likely, obviously, to depend, to change from catchment to catchment, but it's very important that the take-home message here, I think, is very important. And it is that it's not worth targeting rivers which are heavily fragmented, because you would need to remove a very substantial proportion of barriers to see any benefit. On the other hand, it is extremely important to target the restoration efforts in those rivers where the gains are likely to be highest, and of course, to prevent those rivers from becoming more fragmented. And this is particularly timely when we compare our atlas of barriers in Europe, where we can see this fringe here in green, which are the least fragmented rivers in Europe, and we compare that with the plans for new hydroelectric developments. So it is precisely in those areas of Europe which are green, which are relatively free of barriers, where most of the new dams are going to be built. So if we are serious about restoring connectivity, what we first need to do is to stop fragmenting. And that brings me to the take-home message. And the take-home message is very simple. We need to restore connectivity efficiently. And to do that, we need a pan-European strategy. And we recommend that we adopt a two-pronged approach. On the other hand, we need to stop fragmenting rivers. And on the second hand, we need to reconnect wisely. And for that, zonification and priorities are going to be key. And with that, I just wanted to mention to you, I will be happy to take any questions and to remind you that on the 29th of June, we will have a number Feed Hydro webinar that you are all welcome to join us. Thank you.
Wow, Carlos, thank you so much for this presentation. I was really amazed about the numbers you were showing and how if you use the right strategy and you choose your targets perfectly, then we can make a huge impact you don't have to do it all. Already with a small percentage of dam removals, you can have a real impact. So thanks a lot for this story. I am sure there are many questions. So Rosa, can I ask you again to present us 1 or 2 questions for Carlos?
Yes, in fact, there are many questions. For example, one of them, how would you define a barrier which is in use? For example, in many places, in Slovenia in particular, the use of maintaining the water level would be a use. Would you say this is a barrier in use or obsolete? What criteria do you have to classify barriers as being in use or obsolete?
Okay, so yeah, this is a very important question, a very interesting one. It's very important to remember that when we talk about use, we don't talk about impact. A barrier may no longer be used, but is still causing an impact. There's no easy answer for that, but I think that we should argue that a barrier is in use if it is still serving the use it was built for.
Thank you, Carlos. There is time for another question, Rosa. Do you have another question for us?
So do you take into consideration information on the size of the barrier and where they are in the catchment? For example, taking out half of the small barriers, or is it better to take 1 or 2 big barriers?
Yes, again, that's very, very important. The simulations I have shown you assume that all barriers are the same impact and they don't discriminate between barriers. So this is our baseline against which some selective barrier mitigation schemes need to be judged. So of course, by being selective and by assessing each barrier in turn, I think that we can improve these estimates much more. So yes, this is very important, of course, to take into account where they are in the catchment, of course.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. I see there are a lot of more questions, and I can really imagine with the numbers you just showed us, maybe if you can, you could answer some of these questions in the Q&A topic just by typing an answer. But for now, thank you very much for your presentation. Then we're off for the next presentation, and now we are going to zoom in a little bit because we're going to talk about the living fossils of the Donau sturgeon. And Thomas Friedrich is going to share with us what is needed to save this iconic species. And Thomas is a professor at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna. And he is also a researcher at the Institute of Hydrobiology and Aquatic Ecosystem Management. A mouthful. Thomas, thank you very much, and please share us your story.
Hi, everybody. So thank you for being here. I'd like to give you a short overview what the challenges are that we face in the Danube with the sturgeons. Here, not only on behalf of our institute and the projects we're running, but also in a little bit of a larger context for the Danube Sturgeon Task Force, for the World Sturgeon Conservation Society, and the IUCN Sturgeon Specialist Group. And I'm also showing you some other projects that are implemented along the Danube by other institutions. So why are sturgeons actually such good indicators for ecosystem health in a river and for the human impact? Sturgeons are what I like to call are indicators for a long-term stability on a temporal and spatial scale when it comes to the dynamic processes of a river. So they live extremely long, they mature late, they have a high commercial value, which makes them quite sensitive to overharvest, and their complex life pattern and the habitat requirements need a huge range of the river. So you can see here on the right is a map that we did together with several colleagues from the IGB in Berlin, from WWF. You can see all the major rivers in Europe that were once inhabited by anadromous sturgeon species. And you can see that only very few of them are left and are inhabited by sturgeons today, with only the Danube and the Rioni in Georgia with reproductive populations in Europe. So we already heard that sturgeons critically endangered are critically endangered. Sorry, so we're actually talking about one of the most endangered groups of animals around the world. So when we zoom in a little more and look on the Danube, so the Danube is quite a challenge when it comes to management. We have 19 different countries in the catchment. We have 3 more around the Black Sea. So it's quite tricky to install effective management possibilities and to restore the river. What we need to save the sturgeons for once is effective protection in situ in the river of what is remaining. So I took some data from and infos from WWF. They are running 2 live projects on the Lower Danube on poaching, and all of these news are just from the last few weeks and months. So poaching is ongoing and it is a major threat for these fish. And just protecting them alone may not prevent extinction at this point. What we also need is, we need the different habitats for the different life stages. So we need habitats in the sea, we need foraging grounds in the estuary, we need spawning grounds in the upper reaches. And of course, these processes need to be well preserved and need to be connected in order for these fish to fulfill their life cycle. When we look at this map from the Commission for Protection of the Danube River, you can see all the larger barriers on in the Danube River catchment. And our main focus, actually, you can see that the Danube is going up for roughly 800 kilometers from the sea, where we have our first 2 barriers, the so-called iron gates. And these actually hamper the fish from migrating further upstream. And if we could make these 2 barriers passable again, we would reopen another 700 kilometers of free-flowing river. However, sturgeons are quite tricky, so we have fish that grow to huge sizes, so adequate fish pass solutions have to be huge. We have to guarantee safe downstream passage of the spent animals, of the juveniles. And it's quite tricky with regards to how these fish approach dams, actually to guide them to passage facilities. So there's now a project run by the ICPDR, the so-called WePass project, which is a feasibility study on how to build fish passes at the Iron Gate 2. Also, you can see the picture on the left. This is our crew in the Danube doing telemetry work on smaller Potamodromous sturgeon species to check how it approaches a dam and how a fish pass can be installed. Of course, coming back to the last presentation, although we still have quite pristine system with several hundred kilometers of Danube in the middle reaches and really, really nice connected tributaries like the Sava, Drava, Mura, these are also under high pressure from hydropower development. So this has to be kept in mind when we talk about passage solutions, for them not to become obsolete when they are ready, as the upper reaches are dammed at that point. So yeah, these are all the major dams. And now, what else do we need? Unfortunately, when it comes to sturgeons, we have an enormous, dramatically depleted stock. So we see alley effect, we see increased hybridization, and unfortunately, just restoring the habitat and protecting the species in the wild may not be enough to save them. So unfortunately, we have to use ex situ as stopgap measure. So taking fish into captivity, maintaining the genetic strains of the river, and restock juveniles in order to increase the population levels in the future. So this is not something that should be done forever. It's a stopgap measure. Unfortunately, when it comes to sturgeons, as they need a very long time to mature, up to 20 years, this so-called stopgap measure has to be done for a few decades in order to see its success and in order to work. So a quote I really like that I found is, "Time is biodiversity." We can talk a lot, but all these actions, in fact, have to be implemented now before it's too late. We already lost 2 of the Danube sturgeon species. The 3rd one is on the very, very brink of extinction. And all of these different types of actions, ex situ, in situ, connectivity, have to be started right now and have to run in parallel. Yeah, so if there are any questions, I'm really happy to answer them.
Okay, Thomas, thank you very much for this presentation, a really clear story on the sturgeon in the Donau. And it's really fascinating and also a bit worrying to see that the fate of this beautiful species that has been here for so long is really in our hands. And if I understand you correctly, this is the time we can still make a difference. So it's a really exciting, but also a bit of a scary story. Thank you very much for sharing this. Rosa, can I please ask you to give us at least 2 questions, because Thomas had a relatively short presentation, which is really nice.
Fantastic, that gives us more time for questions. So sturgeon is an iconic species and local people are proud of it. But is this iconic status enough to help restore river basin and river system restoration, where a great area of the Danube Delta suffers from several impacts? Which would you say is the main threat that the sturgeons face?
Unfortunately, we are at the level of the population where removing single individuals is critical for the whole population. So poaching is the major threat to the remaining fish. However, we have to be aware that the remaining fish, it's really hard in some species to still call that a population, because reproduction is just sporadic and on a very, very low level.
Thank you very much. So, Steve, working in Southeast Asia, asks that one of the major issues that they have to face is ex situ stocking of wrong species of masher, adding to population pressures. The question is, how do you ensure correct population levels in introduced stocks of sturgeons?
So, of course, when it comes to ex situ and stocking animals, you have to make really sure that you're using the correct genetic material, that you use mating schemes, breeding protocols in order to mate the correct animals with each other, and to refresh your broodstock on a regular basis in order not to overcrowd the fish with very little, with a small genetic pool.
Thank you very much, Thomas. These are really good questions. Rosa, do you have one more question? Because we have some time left.
Let me see.
And if not, we will just use the time for...
Let me see. I was going through the questions. We don't have any more questions for now.
That's no problem, absolutely not, because then we'll just continue to the next speaker. And if there are any other questions, you can still ask them in the Q&A, and I'm sure Thomas will be gladly to answer them if you just write them down. Thanks a lot, Thomas. Then for our next talk, we will go to a river that is actually the source of the delta I am living in myself, the river Rhine. And Mark de Rooij is going to tell us about the restoration of fish migration in this former sewer of Europe. Mark de Rooij is Deputy Head of Unit Water Quality at the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. In the International Commission of the Protection of the Rhine, he chairs the expert group on fish and his background is in environmental quality sciences done at Wageningen University. Mark, a warm welcome to you, and please share us your story. And make sure you are on mute. Yes.
Well, thank you very much. Also for me, it's an honor to give this presentation. Well, the title of my presentation refers to the very bad condition in which the River Rhine has been in the recent past. I'll start just with a map showing where we are. So you can see Europe with Germany, France, the UK, and the River Rhine is, well, this is the whole river basin. So it starts somewhere here in Switzerland, flows via Germany, France, Netherlands, and, well, Luxembourg is there. It's in total about 9 countries working together in the International Commission for the Protection of the Rhine. That already started in 1950, at that time with 5 countries. And well, since about 2000, it was 9 countries. When it comes to migratory fish, well, our main species is the salmon. And on the right-hand side, you see a map of the River Rhine with its historical salmon waters. So you can see that from sea to up in the mountains, salmons used to be found. And it's funny to see that historical data show that they were eaten up to in Switzerland. The natural barrier for the salmon always has been the waterfall in Schaffhausen. So this is why the last part of the Rhine we use the Lake Constant trout to show how it goes with migratory fish. Well, it used to be in all places and also in high amounts. So you can see the figure gives the catch of fish in the Netherlands and Germany. And you can see that in the 19th century, the total catch was about, well, 100,000 to 150,000 salmons per year that were caught. And you also can see the decline of the fish. That was caused by the building of dams, by loss of habitat, of course also by fisheries, and last but not least, the worsening of the water quality. So this ended in 1958. When the last salmon was caught. You can see it here in this picture. And you can even see the names of the persons who were there. Der letzte Lachs aus der Els. So that's a river in Germany. And by that, since that time, it was officially extinct in the Rhine. And since that time, the situation only worsened, because during the 60s, the river really became the sewer of Europe. For example, drinking water companies in the Netherlands who made their drinking water from the river shifted their inlets to another river, to the River Meuse. And rock bottom was reached in 1986. Oh, sorry, 1986, when a fire in Schweizerhalle in Switzerland caused a big discharge of pesticides, and by that wiping out all life in the river from Switzerland to the North Sea. And well, at the same time, this also was the start of the way up, because already in 1987, the Rhine Action Program was launched. And a little surprising, maybe, that took the salmon as a symbol for the healthy Rhine. And you have to keep in mind that at that time, the species had been extinct for about 30 years. So it was well, if you're talking about a daring objective, then you have one here. So since that time, the parties in the Rhine work on the master plan migratory fish. And that sees in well, 3 main lines of work. First, the restoration of the river continuity, the restoration of habitats, and stocking. And well, this is a bit the roadmap, like Carlos said. It is river continuity in the program water. So what you see here is there's some in green that are connected, so they can be reached from sea. There's something in red that has not been connected yet, and that's, well, there are major challenges. and there is in blue, and well, that means that they are not part of the program waters. So we really focus on those that have other colors. And then it's not only, well, it's not only salmon. The salmon is a symbol, but we're also looking at other long distance migratory species like the eel, lamprey, shad, etc. So we always say that, well, I'm going the wrong direction. This is better. We always say that, well, it's just a symbol, and by taking the measures for the salmon, other species will also benefit from it. And the total cost of the whole project or the whole program is estimated at 500 to 600 million euros. And well, of course, this is being spent in a period of several centuries. Sorry, decades. Yeah, nowadays we already see some natural reproduction. So it's on the map here, you can see that there are some places where we see natural reproduction. Of course, this is encouraging, but the population is highly relying on stocking. And this is a picture of where you can find such natural reproduction. So we have some challenges still on the river continuity. It starts with here at the entrance, where we have well, in the Netherlands we built a nice dam against flooding, but it, of course, is also made a harsh separation between salt and fresh water. It's called the Haringvliet Dam, and since last year it is gradually being opened, and so it was we let salt water can go into the fresh water, making it brackish, and this was quite some issue in the Netherlands, because the people who live there had fresh water laying next to them since the 1970s. But this is going to be opened, or is being opened. The process is that it will be opened more and more and more. We are learning by doing, as we say. And then another challenge is in the upper Rhine, where the French built a lateral canal alongside the Rhine, the Grand Canal de l'Alsace, and they equipped them with a lot of hydropower stations. Well, you can see it starts with Ivesheim, Gamsheim, Strasbourg, etc., up to Kemps, which is the next one to Basel in Switzerland. And since 2000, several dams have been equipped with fish passes. And now the issue was the last three, Rheinau, Markelsheim, and Vogelgrün, because in Vogelgrün, the idea is that the fish will go to the old Rhine, and then they can easily swim on to Kemps. Now, the situation in Vogelgrün is still very, very difficult, because fish arrive here in the outer bend of the Rhine, and they should pass this shipping sluices and go to the old Rhine. Now, if you look at the levels, then they arrive here at level 0, and then they have to go over 12 meters of the fish of the shipping sluice, and then go down again into 6 meters of the old Rhine. So it's a very unnatural movement, going up and then going down for a migratory fish. And well, since 2009, people thought this is not going to be solved, and until we had a discussion in 2014. It was organized by the French. And during that workshop, there were some Swiss colleagues who said, well, if we in Switzerland cannot go over a mountain, we tend to build tunnels and go under them. And wouldn't that be a solution for this situation as well? Well, we have been discussing that suggestion for about well, 5 years, 6 years, and thought about, well, would it be technically feasible, and would fish appreciate it, etc. And the good news is that in February of this year, we had a Rhine Ministers Conference in Amsterdam, And at that conference, it was decided that the solution will be built. So in the near future, the last 3 barriers will be equipped with fish positives. Well, we have still many challenges ahead. Of course, we have issues with, well, it was already mentioned in the last presentation, poaching. We don't always like the amount of fish that is being predated by birds or by other fish. Of course, there are large issues on downstream migration with power for water power, and of course also the climate change with the varying or the change of discharge of the river also poses problems. So we are not ready yet. That's clear. But let me end with some hopeful pictures. This is a picture from the Passe à Poisson, so the fish pass in Camps. So that's the last one before for Basel. And in October last year, as you can see, 12th of October, there were 2 fish, one salmon that is named Espérance or Hope, and there was a sea trout that was named Perseverance or Perseverance, and they were heading for Switzerland. So the good news is that it's going the right direction, but we have still a lot of work to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark, for your presentation. And what a nice way to end a presentation when you just presented this gigantic operation that's already taking place for 3 decades now. And also congratulations on the accomplishment apparently in February this year. It's really nice to see that apparently you're still making steps towards the plan you had that was already made 30 years ago. So that's a great story. Thank you. I see many questions in the Q&A. So Rosa, can I ask you to give us 1 or 2 questions?
Yes, there are many. So one of the most voted ones, you were mentioning that after the salmon was extinct from the Rhine and the action program, there were still some salmon coming back. Where did they come from? Which origin, which river?
Well, no, they were not coming back. They have been stocked. So there were several. There was a stocking with elder species or elders from Sweden, the Altran breed, and some from the Loire. And with that, they started a new Rhine salmon, so to say.
So with several of the wealthiest countries in the world managing rivers along the Rhine and the EU policy framework, what would you like to see as the next leap of policy to make progress at a much larger scale needed? What?
So I see, I understand what would be the next step. I think, well, I think that at this moment we are almost there when it comes to the main river, so the main stream, and I think now it will become more and more important to also go to the tributaries and to also make the smaller streams accessible.
Do you have time for the next one, for the last one?
Yes, definitely.
Yes. So under your experience, what do you think are the main steps to restore a degraded coastal ecosystem?
Degraded coastal ecosystem. Yeah, well, for me, it's when it comes to the Netherlands, I think that or the Rhine system, yeah, it's. I think the 2 big entrances from the Rhine are being restored. So Arjen already showed this fish migration river in the Afsluitdijk. So that's the north part of the Netherlands. So where in the delta. But I think that for a river system as the Rhine, it's more important to restore the well, the smaller streams upstream than the coast at this moment.
There's no simple questions for you, Nor. There are big questions, so thanks a lot for these answers. Yes, looking at the time, I just had a small question for you. What do you hope to accomplish within your reach, say, the next few years?
Yeah, well, for me, it's very important to connect with people. This is a lesson that we learned from the Haringvliet. So this was the opening of the Haringvliet Dam, where we had really a lot of local resistance to this measure. And that was because people didn't understand how large the whole river system was behind their local area. So what we are trying to do now is to try to link up all kind of visitor centers along the Rhine to make it clear to just ordinary people that there is a connection between what happens in their part of the river, a connection with other parts. So if you're looking at a part of the Rhine in Switzerland, where you could have this natural reproduction, then there is a link with the North Sea or even with the Atlantic Ocean. And well, it's very difficult for people to realize that kind of relations actually exist.
Oh, great. Thanks a lot for that addition. I think that's a very valuable point you're making. It is not just about the technical content, the ecological content, but also about the relationship with ourselves, with humans. Thanks a lot for this, Mark. Wow, we already got four great presentations, but there are two more to come. And for the next story, we will travel further up north. We go to Sweden, where Ole Kalles will present to us a beautiful case study on dam removal. And Ole is associate professor at Karlstad University, and his research focuses on river habilitation techniques and fish migration in regulated rivers. And currently he leads a research team on dam removal projects. So we're really looking forward for your presentation, Ole. So if you're ready, then you can please get started.
Okay.
On your screen.
Thanks a lot. Yes, I will do.
Thank you.
Does it look okay?
Yes, there it is. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Right, so from the Rhine to the source of today's Rhine salmon, the River Ätran. Just brief orientation. We just saw a map. Here's another one. So this is Northern Europe, Scandinavian countries. And right, there is Sweden. So this is Karlstad University, situated just north of the largest lake in the EU, Lake Vänern. And our study river is a bit south. This is the catchment of River Ätran. But before we move on to the details, I would like to give you a brief background to Swedish rivers, because they are not as pristine as you may or may not think, but instead they are severely impacted. So we see a lot of fragmentation from various barriers and also quite a lot of habitat destruction. So there's definitely a dire need of river restoration. And the Swedish River Restoration Toolbox, as we like to call it, well, typically we worked mostly with upstream passage, mostly for salmonid species. Since about a decade back, we also work on downstream passage, and of course we have carried out quite a lot of habitat restoration. But a rather new addition to the toolbox is dam removal. And on top of that, we have quite a few interesting innovations that we're currently taking a closer look at. But we also have a new legislation kicking in this year. So we're going to relicense all 2,300 hydropower plants in Sweden within the next 20 years. And that's a major challenge for sure. So the River Ätran, medium size, I would say, by Swedish standards. And in regards of connectivity, the white area is what has been available to diatomous fish migrating upriver, assuming that they can pass the dams at Hatting and Nydala. And as for us, our main study object has been the Hatting hydropower plant because it's situated just next to the river mouth. And so pretty much all fish migrating upstream will have to pass this site in order to spawn and rear further upstream. So this is the plant. Flow direction is from your upper right to your lower left. There are two powerhouses. We have powerhouse 1 inside an artificial channel, and we have a second, slightly smaller powerhouse just next to the dam that shut off what used to be the main stem of this river. So upstream migrating fish will have to go left towards powerhouse 2 to find the old Denil fishway that provided upstream passage. And for downstream passage, there was a trash gate or an ice gate operated just next to the turbine intake of the first powerhouse. This was not enough, however, and we saw a decline in regards of the number of salmonid spawners passing through this fishway up until 2013, when the owner decided to do something drastic about this decline. And so they decided to remove most of the dam up here and restore the original riverbed, the previous main stem of the river. So all these old trees were cut down, the channel was restored, and at the very top, where the old dam used to be, there were 2 weirs built to keep the levels to some extent in the upstream area. And there is a full depth opening in between those 2 weirs. So we have a minimum discharge of 11 cubic meters per second in this fishway, which is equivalent to about 20% of the mean annual discharge, so quite a large proportion. And for downstream passage, we constructed a screen or an angled rack with a full depth bypass to provide safe downstream passage for fish. And yes, this did have a negative impact on hydropower production, which was reduced by about 1/3, mainly because of the large discharge released in the fishway, and also because the level upstream was lowered by about 60 centimeters. But the downstream passage facility as the first powerhouse did not have a negative impact on power production. So in regards of downstream passage, we went from a conventional bar rack with 90mm bar spacing, and the trash gate is over here, to an angled rack with a full depth bypass and 15mm bar spacing. And this is what it looks like from above. So we have the bypass here, and this is the monitoring station that we've used. So the project goals were pretty straightforward. We wanted to strengthen diatomous fish populations, and we targeted Atlantic salmon, European eel, and sea lamprey. These species are rather different, so we also saw them as umbrella species for other migratory species in the river. And we focused on quantifying passage efficiency or passage success and passage time or delay. So we monitored this, we measured this before and after modifications. And the methods we used, well, we used a lot of different capturing techniques to get our hands on wild fish, because there's only wild fish in this river. And then we have mostly used radio telemetry to track fish. But we also had access to data from fish counters inside the old and the new fishways. So a bit about the results. First, salmon spawners and kelts. So salmon spawners before modifications, about 2/3 of them managed to pass, but it took them on average 3 weeks, 21 days. So not too bad, but not ideal. After modifications, we managed to increase the passage rate up to close to 100%. So the implication of this is that we have a 50% increase of spawners actually reaching the spawning grounds, and the passage time was lowered to 4 days. Downstream moving post-spawners or kelts distributed more or less evenly between the two powerhouses. And they were lucky enough to experience quite a bit of spill discharge. So most of them passed with spill discharge, and we had an overall survival or passage efficiency of 80% and a rather low passage time. But this was in a wet year, so a lot of spill water was being released. We conducted a pilot study a couple of years before, and then that was in a dry year, and survival was only roughly 30%. After modifications, we had fish, we had kelts, using the nature-like fishway for downstream passage and the bypass. So the survival was increased to, again, close to 100% at a very limited, very low passage time. So today, spill water is always released, it's always wet, so to say. So we're pretty confident that this number will stay high, close to 100%, whereas in previous years, we were dependent on flow conditions, and we only had decent passage conditions in wet years. So moving on to salmon, smolts, and silver eels migrating downstream. Before modifications, they also distributed rather evenly between the two powerhouses. Spill discharge was very low these years. So pretty much all individuals went through the intake racks and through the turbines. So we saw passage efficiency of 90% for smolts and 70% for silver eels. So not that great, at least not for silver eels. Smolts after modifications, about a 50-50% distribution. We also had an added value here in the fishway with increased parr production, and passage efficiency was 90%. But now all smolts move past the dam with spilled water instead of through the turbines. And quite similar for eels, a 50-50% distribution and a passage efficiency of between 95 and 100%. And they passed within 1 day. So looking at the salmonid spawner count again, we have broken the negative trend. It's now increasing again, and of course it will level off as other bottlenecks, probably habitat, kick in, but still this is very, very promising results, of course. But with the increased passage conditions or the improved passage conditions, we also see more of the unwanted guests, so exotic species like the pink salmon and the mitten crab. But we don't know the consequences of these visits yet. So I'd like to end by asking you to apply for one of our or several of our PhD student positions. We're looking for 15 PhD students that will be working with topics like this for the next 3 to 4 years. And in the map to your right, you can see the different countries where these positions will be based. So please apply, tell all your friends. We want a lot of strong candidates applying, of course. That's it. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thanks a lot, Ole. And how wonderful for you to invite the students, which apparently were here looking at the first poll, to give them an opportunity to join your activity. So hopefully there might be one within those 320 participants that can join. Thank you very much. For me, I really love about the story is that you did such good monitoring job, because in my experience, sometimes we try to, we actually do mitigation measures, but forget to really monitor the effect of what we're doing, because only then you can really see the result and whether your mitigation measure is giving you the result that you planned for. So thanks a lot for this talk.
Thanks.
Rosa, can I ask you, do you have 1 or 2 questions for Ole?
Hi, Ole.
Hey.
Lovely presentation. So yes, I understand most of the results you have presented are part of a monitoring program. And I would like to know, for how long do you expect to be monitoring results, and an average cost of the program? That's the first of the questions.
That's a tricky one. Well, the fish migration studies is no longer happening, but the fish counters are obviously operating. There's also monitoring taking place in the downstream passage facility. So there will be annual counts of how many fish that are passing upstream and downstream. And of course, there's also a electrofishing program conducted throughout the catchment. About costs, that's a tricky one. I can't really say. Were you talking about the research or the facility itself?
Both. If you can give us some idea of the estimation.
It will be my best guess. The facility, there were a lot of other things that came with it, since it's situated inside a city, about like 3 million euros, roughly.
Okay. And then we have another question. Is there anything specific you would have done differently in this project with the knowledge you have today? Looking backwards?
Yes, quite a few things, of course. It is still, I would say, the best example, well, the best practice example we have of passage facilities. I would have done the monitoring station in a different way, because it's a bit problematic. If you want to catch fish in there, you also catch a lot of trash. And to keep trash or woody debris and stuff, debris and fish together overnight, for example, it's not a good solution at all. So I would have done that and other things differently.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, Ale, thank you very much for your presentation time and for answering these questions. When I look down at another call for different speakers, that if you have time, maybe you can have a look at the questions, and if you can maybe answer them by typing an answer. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Great. So now we are up for already our final presentation in this European session of the Global Swimway Webinar Marathon. And we go down with a bang, because Kuli Temur is going to finish with a story of great hope, I think. The biggest European river restoration project of a European river taking place in Estonia. Now, Kuli Temur is project coordinator at the environmental agency in Estonia, and she leads the dam removal project, which opened the biggest river basin in Europe in 2019. So I'm really looking forward for your story, Kuli. If you are ready, then please start sharing your screen and take us along in your story. Perfect, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Great introduction. I really answer all your expectations, but I'm gonna tell you about my project. It's the river restoration of Pärnu River Basin in Estonia. And to begin, some facts about the Pärnu River Basin. It's the second longest river in Estonia, and it covers almost 17% of Estonia's territory. Pärnu River has 270 tributaries, and altogether they are more than 3,000 kilometers of flowing river. Pärnu River is the biggest salmonids river in Estonia. It's bigger than the other 10 all put together, so it's quite important for our salmonids. And the river has 22 species that are depending on the spawning area of the river. So this is Estonia's map. The blue lines show the river basin laying on Estonia, and the red dots that you can see on the screen are the dams that are already removed or will be removed along this project. And if you see the closest red dot, this is the sea, and this is the closest red dot, the closest dam to the sea. This is the biggest one that I'm going to share you my presentation about. So this is the dam. The picture is taken in October 2013. The Sindi Dam is 14 kilometers from the sea. And it's not a really high dam, but I really remember this one example that it doesn't matter if the dam is 1 meter high or 20 meters high. If the fish can't pass it, then they can't pass it. It covers the whole river. And as you can see, the picture from 7 years ago, before we even started planning this project. But this is the picture from October 2018. And now you can see that the works has already begun. But how did we get here? I like this graphics, and I have considered that there are 4 crucial elements in this equation. Everybody in Europe has the legal obligations coming from Water Framework Directive and Nature Directive that you have to achieve the good ecological status of the water bodies, and fisheries are one part of it. So, so there's this legal basis. What I also like to present is that in Estonia we have system and team. It's crucial that the Estonian public servants work in one field quite long time, or maybe they will circulate in one field, change from ministry to environmental board, but they still are involved in everything that is done in Estonian environmental system. And then there's money. We had the possibility to use European Cohesion Fund money for removal of this dam. So we have all these 3 components put together, but there's always this one crucial one, the politics. I have worked in the environmental field for 14 years now, but during that time there's been 9 different environmental ministers, but none of them had the guts or support for removing this dam. But I think we had a bit of luck, and there was a time period 3 months before elections when we had the minister changing in Ministry of Environment. And I don't know if this dam removal was his politics, or we just had the luck that he didn't look too deeply into it, but he made a decision to remove this Sindi dam. And literally the next week we had the project going on. And so this is the picture that is taken 1 month after we started construction works. And you can see here that on the left side, we have actually already achieved our purpose. Half of the dam had been removed, and actually this is already usable for fish. All the fish could pass this dam already. But here you can see the old dam still left. We had to do all the construction works or demolition works in the dry waterbed. We couldn't do any demolition works in the flowing river. So we had to surround all the construction area with these temporary dams and make this area dry so we can do our work here. But as you can see, the half of the river is still free, and the fish could already pass it during the construction works. And we're literally brick by brick. Yes?
Good. Shortly interrupting. It's a great story up till now. You're a little bit hampering. Could you maybe turn off your video so maybe the connection will improve a little bit?
Let's hope so.
We hear most of it, but sometimes it's the connection loses it. Thank you very much. Let's try again. Thank you.
Okay, let's try again. So this is how we did this work. We had to build this artificial rapid in the dry riverbed. So literally brick by brick, we laid this surface to ensure the riverbed. And it also had other meaning. We raised the water level a bit for the outdoor swimming pool for the people living in the city. This was the city's requirement, but we did it in a way that it was in all times accessible for fish, and they could swim by it. And if we will jump again a few months on, then this is okay. Just some problem. Okay, this is the first day we let the river back to its natural riverbed, and now all these bricks or stones we laid there are covered with water. So this is pretty much what we hope to achieve, and you can still see some construction works going on the left side of the river, but for that day, today, they are all finished, and the whole river looks like the right side of the picture here. And I would really like to share this video from a few weeks ago. This is me standing in the middle of the rapid that we built. You can see the free-flowing river, and it was the day the Wimba fish started their migration upstreams. Sorry about the noise. You can see the fish there, and they're not stuck there. There was just so much fish in the sea that now I have this great story, the great fisherman's story, to tell everybody that I have caught a fish with my bare hands. So this is shortly my success story. I can honestly say today that this is my success story because everything has gone better than we hoped during this project. So that's it for me.
Cool. Thank you so much for the story. What a great way to end this webinar. Well, for the last presentation, amazing to see that the efforts you made result in all these fish just cramping up these locations where you can just grab them with your bare hands. Really fascinating. Thank you very much. I am also sure that there are other people who would like to ask a question, so I'm going to ask Rosa to, well, tell us a few questions.
Yes, indeed there are. The first question is there a monitoring program that will continue this removal?
Yes, this whole Pärnu river system is a part of our national monitoring network anyway, because this is a really big river. So no special monitoring is done by during this project, but there is an ongoing national monitoring system anyway. And what we are planning is to build an underwater camera monitoring site on this rapid, so people could check every day. This is live stream camera, and people could actually see and watch by themselves fish going by. Let's hope they are going by the camera and being weighed.
Fantastic. We have some questions also regarding the societal part. How large was the societal support for the removal of this dam? How did the communication with locals work?
This was our trickiest part, I must say. At the beginning of the project, there was the whole community was against this project. They had this artificial lake there. They had this outdoor swimming pool, and it had grown to people's heart. And also this town was built because of this dam. It was built. This dam was built for a wool factory in centuries ago. So the whole town was involved to this dam and attached to this dam. But we made a lot of public meetings, a lot of public hearings. We answered everybody's questions. We showed the whole project and the whole process to people. And person by person, we won them over. And today, the city is planning a kayaking center on this rapid. People are constantly walking next to the river. Before this project, the site was almost inaccessible because there was bushes, there were gardens, and it was actually quite dangerous. But today, the whole city is using this site. There are not nice pathways next to the river, so I think today we don't have anyone opposing this project.
Fantastic, that's great news. We have a last short question, if we have the time. Will you be able to share the images from this camera that you will be using in the monitoring program?
Of course, there's going to be a live stream link. I can share it with I don't know who, but I think I will make this big release when it's finished. So, and share it through the European Dam Removal Network, maybe.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kuli. And also pretty amazed that when you start this project and the community is actually so much against it that you've been able with your team to turn it around to actually accomplish this this success. I think that's really amazing. So congratulations with this, and thanks again for sharing this this story with us.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that was the final presentation. I'm just looking at the time, and there might be just time to ask one or two more questions to the other speakers. It might be nice for this time for the other speakers actually to put on the cameras again, so we have an overview of all the speakers. So if you like, then please review yourselves. Yes. And Rosa, maybe you can find one or two more questions, else I will just...
Yes, of course. So for example, we have a few questions on the Amber Citizen program. How will the data be used?
And that question
Carlos?
is for Carlos, yes.
Yes, exactly, sorry.
Yes, the data is being used to basically fill the gaps in the barrier atlas. And as you may know, people who register are able to download their own data, and the data is going to be publicly available. Anybody can have a look at it. And by the way, we have been asked if the barrier tracker is going to be discontinued, and that is not the case. We will continue to support the barrier tracker even after Amber project is finished.
Yes, we have, for example, a few questions for William. Is there a connection between the global assessment of freshwater fishes and some kind of assessment of saltwater fishes?
Hello. Yes, there's a...
And in that, sorry to interrupt, and in that same line, what linkages are required to generate the global swimways map?
Okay, well, the first part, you mean linkages between marine and freshwater? Well, the first thing is, yes, there's a marine biodiversity unit within IUCN, which is working with their network of experts around the world, also assessing marine fishes, and they're aiming to try and get them all done as well. But they're doing, rather than trying to do the whole globe in one go, they're moving by family normally to try and get the whole, everything within one family assessed. That's ongoing, but they're making good progress. Funding as usual. Could be done much quicker if the money was there. And then linking, you talk about linking marine migration routes to freshwater. Well, that's something we've just started looking at within the Swimways project, actually, which is that example put up for the European eel, was just to see how it might look if we get information on these marine migration routes, see how it might be presented. But as I mentioned in my talk, it's all about preliminary analysis to show what things could look like, and then it'll go to much wider consultation and feedback. So just to really show what potential outputs could look like. But the plan is to link the two, obviously. So I hope that answers it. Yeah.
We have one for Ole, I guess. Are the energy generators public or private? How do you manage that negative impact in power generation?
Yeah, it's a special case because the plant is owned by the municipality. So obviously it's easier for them to see the other side of, well, the benefits of restoring this site. And it also went from a rather industrial place to, well, pretty beautiful site. So it's a bit different, but we also have cases with other power companies doing rather advanced restoration.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Maybe just one last question, Rosa? Or...
Okay, many of the questions have been answered by the different speakers in the chat, so you can check the answers. Because for sure we don't have time to ask them all. We have a general one here, which was asked just at the beginning. Why do you focus so? This can be answered by many of you, I guess. Why do you focus so much on the European eel as a major fish species? What is special with European eel related to biodiversity conservation?
Let's pinpoint out someone, maybe someone we didn't hear yet in these questions. Maybe Mark, could you tell us something about it? Do you have an idea on this?
Yes, well, I think whether you take a salmon or the European eel, it's the same. I mean, it's species that really need a good habitat and a good connectivity in all waters. And in that sense, if you take the right measures for the eel, there is a lot of other species that will benefit by it for it. And in the Rhine, we look at the eel mainly for the downstream migration. So if we think that if you have a large fish like an eel, if that can pass all hydropower plants or all barriers, then it will be passable for other species as well. And we use the salmon or maybe some other less good swimmers for upstream migration, because if you have them, then you know that well, if it's possible for them, then you know that that other species will benefit from it too. So I think it's not useful to look at one species only and to say, well, if that species is there, then everything is. But yeah, use it as a symbol, and I think then it can be really it can be very strong to have a symbol, and well, as was done with the salmon in the Rhine, I think.
Thank you very much for this answer, Mark. Now we're going to go for a wrap up. Thank you very much, different speakers, for your time, for your story, and for sharing these really interesting information and results with us. Just to shortly wrap up, we started off with the Global Swimways, where Will told us all about how these swimways are created, and Carlos took us with him in the story of how to reconnect European rivers again. Then we went to the Donau, where we had a talk of Thomas telling us about the sturgeon, which is on the edge of extinction, and how we have the faith in our hands. Then Mark told us everything about the River Rhine and restoration project that is going on there. And then we had some beautiful case studies on dam removals by Ole and Kuli. I think it was a really magnificent story. We were really glad with all of you finding the time to tell us these stories. And well, thanks a lot. And I want to give Arjan the opportunity to give us the final words before we finish this European session of our Global Swimway Webinar Marathon.
Yeah, Mark, and it doesn't feel like a duty because it's really impressive. What a great stories. Fantastic session. I would like to thank the sponsors that made this possible. There's quite a lot. I would maybe later tonight, when it's all finished, we can mention them all. That they deserve that. They also support us for World Fish Migration Day. Thank you very much for that. And thank you, Mark, and thank you all the speakers. Fantastic session, absolutely. And I think I can also say that on behalf of the species themselves. They cannot speak, but I'm sure they appreciate that. And then I would like to end this session with a song. This is a European session. We all know there's Eurovision. Usually in 2 days that would have happened in the Netherlands actually, but because of the COVID situation, it is not going to happen. But we have Eurovision, and there are several songs being sent to us. We've uploaded that on a website, Eurovision, and in 2 days time, you all can vote. So there are different songs you can listen to, make a vote, and we'll have a winner later on. You can still also, if you're a good singer or if you like to make music, you can also send in contributions still. It's not too late. What I would like to do now is show you one of the songs, which is actually one of the, well, one that I like very much. I think it was really, really nice, and we'll see you at the next session very soon. That will be about South America, starting soon. But first, let us enjoy the music
Oh, na 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 na. Tusipoziba ufa tutajenga ukuta, tutunze mazingira na masandio sasa, to protect our environment. The future generations will judge us by our actions today. Ufa tutajenga ukuta, tutunze mazingira na masandio sasa, to protect our environment. The future generations will judge us by our actions today.
Rivers can't take it no more. Reason being in a choke from all the plastic and waste material being disposed. Take a trip down Nairobi River. I promise there's nothing to smile about. All you will see is bumpers and condoms floating around. Look in the flow of water. Fish in a shindo tuli. Fanya nini to deserve this? Tourists gonna die. There's really nothing to see here. We are careless for the rivers that came up for us. Give us water plus, it's a natural resource. To chunge our resources. The source is God, He put us in charge. So let us take charge. Let us take charge.
Tusipoziba ufa tutajenga ukuta, tutunze mazingira na masandio sasa. We have to protect our environment. The future generations will judge us by our actions today. Ufa tutajenga ukuta, tutunze mazingira na masandio sasa. We have to protect our environment. The future generations will judge us by our actions today.
If we have clean rivers, then to corner clean lakes. When we have clean lakes, then we have more fish. Then to corner more food, feeding up the nation. Everything is all good. Namika Larry Dwayne, I will play my part clean. Easy river to heal the scars. Kawangari thigh. I will die for this. Big up to Kila Mzee, anacheza kama yeye, making sure innovations don't destroy our earth. Now the slums going green, mazingira yetu haya ya wasafi.
Haya ya wasafi, tusipoziba ufa tutajenga ukuta, tutunze mazingira na masandio sasa, to protect our environment. The future generations will judge us by our actions today. Ufa tutajenga ukuta, tutunze mazingira na masandio sasa. We got to protect our environment. The future generations will judge us by our actions today.
Na Wakenya mto zetu zinaumia, takataka zimejaa inaumia, uchafu na plastiki ndio samaki sahi. We really need to do something to change this. Take responsibility, be responsible, reduce, recycle. Stop turning our forest into dumping sites. It's a bad sight walai, inafaa tuna act sahi, otherwise future itakuwa messed up. Just imagine toi wako anauliza what's a river, utajibu utamwambia nini? Akiuliza Lake Victoria ilifanyika nini? Walai, it's crazy. We really need to change this.
We really need to change this now. I say we really need to change this now.
What a great song. Okay, we're going to wait now for the next session.